From the nation's capital in Washington, D.C., Call on Congress. The program discussing national issues that affect Oklahoma. Your host, U.S. Representative Tom Cole.
Hi, this is Congressman Tom Cole. Thank you all for joining me for this first edition of Cole on Congress. In the months ahead, I'll look forward to discussing the important issues in Congress that affect us here in Oklahoma. Today, I'd like to touch on the issue that's very important to our nation, our state, and to me personally, and that's education. As a former educator myself, I understand that a quality education is the foundation for achieving the American dream. And with the upcoming reauthorization of both No Child Left Behind as well as the Higher Education Act, Congress is working diligently to ensure that the next generation of Americans are equipped with the education they need to secure their future. We're joined today by my very good friend and colleague, Congresswoman Shelley Moore Capito. Congresswoman Capito grew up in West Virginia and is a member of one of that state's most prominent political families. She served with me on the Rules Committee during the 109th Congress, but this session she's taken her seat on the Financial Services Committee and the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure. Congresswoman Capito's been a strong voice for quality education across America, and before her days on Capitol Hill, she worked for the Educational Information Center in West Virginia. And we're happy to have her here with us today to discuss education in America. Shelley, great to have you here.
Thank you. Thanks for asking me.
Well, I've got to start with a personal question, if I may. As you probably know, my mother was a state legislator and a very prominent political leader in my home state. You obviously had a similar experience growing up in a very political household with one of the really great public leaders in West Virginia, your father. So how did that impact your decision to actually get involved directly in the nitty-gritty of politics?
Well, as you know, growing up in a political family, my father was a 6-term member of the House of Representatives and a 12-year governor of the state of West Virginia. So that's a pretty long span of years of going to parades, listening to political speeches, dinner time conversations around current events. And I think of all, I have a brother and a sister. Of the three of us, I was the one that was particularly interested the whole time. And I decided to stick my toe in the political waters on my own in 1996 when I ran for the House of Delegates. But I had a lot of experience in terms of watching my father not only help people, but communicate with people, and also with making us aware that you really can make an impact in people's lives, both big and small, when you put yourself on the line in an election and you're lucky enough to get elected and to move into that office.
Did you ever get any sage pieces of political advice from your dad?
Yes, yes. My dad has given me some very good advice from time to time. One, which is not his particularly original to him, which is information is power. Learn as much as you can about whatever you're getting ready to act on or whatever you're getting ready to talk about. He also tries to encourage me to not share all the information that I have because...
A hard thing for politicians.
It's very hard. A politician and a woman, that's like double trouble. And he also has, told me to be respectful of everybody, no matter whether, big or small, whatever kind of context you meet them in your life.
Well, obviously, you also had a professional background in education before you came to Congress. So tell me, what are the issues you see emerging in Congress as far as education are concerned in the next session?
Well, I think, we've got issues, I think, on the global educational scene that sort of trouble me, and that is the lack of competitiveness for our upcoming college graduates and high school graduates, a lack of emphasis in math and science. I was a science major actually in college, but I think that if current statistics keep going the way they are, most of the engineers, most of the professional scientists, most of the researchers are going to be coming from countries not in the United States. And that worries me. And I think we've tried to address it a couple of ways to incent science and math education and to drive a competitiveness agenda. But I think it's something we want to make sure we keep our eye on the ball. Also for women, that's an area that's a sort of a weakness for women, that not as many women go into those areas. I'd like to see us try to get that interest in math and science and research, because I think it's going to be critically important on how we are able to compete in the global market in the future. So that's one item that I know I've got my eye on.
What are your constituents telling you about things like No Child Left Behind and the Higher Education Reauthorization Act?
Well, the No Child Left Behind is pretty much a mixed bag. I would imagine it's the same in Oklahoma as it is in West Virginia. Everybody agrees on the concept, the accountability, the theory that every child is entitled to not only an education but a good education, and that there should be certain benchmarks that prove that this child is actually learning. And I think that everybody agrees with that. It's where the rubber meets the road is the implementation, if there have been some difficulties in West Virginia. I will say, in terms of adequate yearly progress, our schools are moving along. It's now our high schools are the ones that are falling a little bit behind, but they're behind the elementary schools in terms of implementation. I think that there's some frustration in West Virginia about the parameters for testing special ed students. That's probably the one thing I hear about from educators more than anything else, that they don't believe that it is a fair assessment of a special ed student and their education and their progress if you're testing a child that absolutely cannot meet a fourth grade reading level, and you're testing them on the fourth grade reading level, and then the next year you're testing them on the fifth grade reading level, and maybe their incremental progress is a lot smaller than what those tests, but it's still progress. So there's a lot of frustration with what they think is an inflexibility in No Child Left Behind, and of course you always hear the funding issues. There's never enough money. And I think my answer to that is it's a matter of priorities. It's where you're going to put your money, where you're going to put your emphasis, and that's going to lead to your best results. So I hear a lot about No Child Left Behind, but there's some really good things about it that are working. In West Virginia, they have the highly qualified teachers. We have 94% of the teachers in our classroom are highly qualified.
Wow.
I think that's a pretty daggone good statistic. And a lot of our schools are moving up in terms of progress. That's the number one thing I hear. I don't know what Oklahoma...
Very, very similar. Again, I think it's incredibly frustrating for students and teachers alike, special ed kids, to not make the grade when they know they're making progress. And although we've found, at least to some degree, that Secretary Spellings and the Department of Education has been willing to deal with us. And I think reauthorization really does provide us in Congress with the opportunity to take the very practical experience that our teachers and administrators have had on the ground and now change the law. And as I always tell my educators in my area, that's why we do reauthorization. We want to be able, we know we can't write something this big and get it perfect the first time. So there's a lot of good things. Let's keep the good. Let's figure out ways to go on and correct any deficiencies that we see.
Right. One of the programs I like that has been started with No Child Left Behind is the Reading First program, which is in the early childhood, probably K through 3 or 1 through 3, where more funds have gone to the states. I think West Virginia has gotten an extra $50 million to try to get those students in that age bracket to be more proficient in reading. Now, I'm a mother of 3, and I know from my experience of them going through elementary school that if you're not reading on 3rd grade, if you can't be on that level in 3rd grade, you just incrementally fall further and further behind as you move through. So 3rd grade is a really critical year for reading, and I think that this Reading First is really making some good inroads into helping those that are having a little bit of difficulty kind of catching it, so that when they get to 3rd grade and move on to 4th grade, they're on the same level playing field as their other students in the class.
Well, again, that's one of the virtues of the program, is identifying problems early enough to actually get them corrected, so that kids don't get so far off track that they can't come back and make up for whatever deficiencies they'd had. What about higher ed? What are you hearing on the Higher Ed Reauthorization Act? I represent the University of Oklahoma as well as 4 other higher ed facilities in my district, so obviously that's a big point of concern for me.
Well, in higher ed, I mean, of course, you and I have a shared passion for the TRIO programs, and that is part of that. In higher ed, I think I think we need to address questions of readiness when people are approaching higher ed. I think we need to look at moving people from a 2-year program to a 4-year program with ease. I think we need to I would like to see us look to encourage our institutions to look at the relevance of some of what their programs are teaching and what it's going to lead to later. what kind of relevance it might have in the working world. And I'd like to see our institutions become more agile. I think this is a problem throughout higher ed, that there's no ability to react quickly to a job trend. I mean, quickly, I'm talking 4 or 5 years. I'm not talking 4 or 5 months. It seems that they're large boats and they're hard to turn. But by and large, I think we have West Virginia University and Marshall University are sort of our marquee institutions in the state, and we have a lot of really good private schools and two-year community colleges.
Yeah, that's actually in our area where we find the flexibility the most is the community colleges and the career technology centers, which really are geared to make very rapid adjustments and to capitalize on job opportunities and get kids ready. And they're actually one of the great values in the system. I think tend to be, we all have a very traditional, particularly people my age, view of what college ought to be and when you ought to start. The reality is it's so much different for kids today, for frankly, not just kids, but just people in general. The age of the average American student now is almost a decade higher than it was when I went to college 40 years ago now. So it's a changing world. You mentioned TRIO and Gear. Well, I'll throw in Gear Up, and I really want to ask you to talk to our audience a little bit about those programs. In my state, they're targeted particularly for kids from families that have never had the opportunity to go to college. Gear Up helps get them ready as they're preparing to go, make sure that they get the coursework they need, the kinds of things that allow you to be successful once you arrive. And TRIO does some of that and then continues that, again, by providing an atmosphere, a whole variety of programs, 5 different ones that will help students succeed so that these kids that there's no family experience with college get the support they need to be successful. So we have huge numbers of TRIO students compared to most states. What's the experience in West Virginia?
Well, we have 6 higher education institutions that have TRIO programs. Interesting thing about TRIO for me is I actually worked in a TRIO program.
Oh, really?
Yes. It has sort of morphed into something else now, but in the late 70s, it was called the Educational Information Center, and its whole purpose was to create the information and get it to the students on all post-secondary educational opportunities in the state. So I sort of worked on a statewide basis, and then worked with the other TRIO programs, which were then Talent Search mostly and Upward Bound, to try to get that information to their students. And so we have an active TRIO program. We have some of the longest running programs. I know West Virginia State University, which is in my district, formerly West Virginia State College, has had a program since the 60s, Upward Bound program. And what's interesting to me is a lot of these students, they don't have parents that went to college. They're by and large lower income students. They might lack a little confidence, but they can grab these students at a fairly young age. And I think the one program is 5th grade and one is 8th grade, and really start to familiarize them with what it's like to be on a college campus, help them with their math and reading so that they're up to skill levels, help them with their entrance exams, help them with filling out college applications, all different kinds of things. And I think it's been a very, very much of a success. I know there's a lot of support in Congress for these programs, and it helps the institutions too, because it's a ready-made store of applicants and people who are, and I think it's exciting for institutions to be able to serve folks that don't have, I mean, both of my parents went to college, and I had the opportunity every day of hearing them say, before you do anything, you have to graduate from college. But if you didn't have that kind of reinforcement all day long, it would be more difficult to accept that challenge.
Even families that had that, neither of my parents graduated from college, so I was the first one that was going to have the opportunity, and so I was always brought up with, you're going to do this, but nobody in the household really knew what that meant after that. What are the preparatory courses that you absolutely have to have? What are the kinds of institutions that might be appropriate for somebody with your background, skill set? Where should you be looking? And again, I was very fortunate. I had a mother who was very intent that this would happen, and she spent a lot of time working it. We had some good counselors, and we found the right match. But that's not true for a lot of kids. They face much more challenging circumstances sometimes at home, and even with the best of intentions, parents that simply aren't equipped or don't have the time to give them the guidance that they need. Well,
the financial hurdles are tough too. Not only affordability, but where do you find out about financial aid? How do you fill out the forms? Where do you get all the information? And I think that's what these TRIO programs are really good at, particularly when you get to the financial part of trying to afford to go to college.
Well, these programs, too, and it really goes back to a point that you made in your opening comment about the economic challenges that we face around the world, not having enough engineers, not having enough scientists, moving into a more globally competitive economy. The kids that TRIO deals with are sort of new people that you can bring into the higher education marketplace, so that we've got a population that has the skill sets that we need to be competitive.
Right.
Pretty critical, I think, in that regard. It's not just a question of helping the kids, which I think is first and always the most important thing. You want to help people make their dreams, but it's also a question of giving us the workforce we need so that the next generation has the quality of life that Americans have come to expect.
Well, I mean, in our state, we have a large manufacturing history of manufacturing. We obviously have energy. I know you have that in Oklahoma. We have a lot of coal, a lot of oil and gas, but we need to change in West Virginia. We need to get out of the manufacturing job, because the jobs honestly aren't there anymore. And with the mechanization and the modernization of mining, what used to take 100 miners can probably be done by 10 or 15 now. And that's where I think the educational institutions can really be of great help in terms of making sure people are up to speed on their technology, jobs of the future, virtual jobs, all those kinds of things, critically important to this century's job force. We talk about, and it's discouraging, some jobs being offshored over to India. If you want to call about your insurance, you get somebody in India. That shouldn't be happening. Those are jobs that we should have in the United States. We should be able to have in a more rural area. I actually have a bill out there called the Rural IT to try to attract IT jobs into rural areas. So,
sounds like something ought to get on, huh?
Yeah, I think we should get on that. So I think there's a lot of possibilities. It's just we need to find a good match between education and the job force, and people are working on it all day long.
Well, this is true in Oklahoma. It may or may not be true in West Virginia. It's also a question for us of having the kind of workforce that will attract in the industries that we want to have, that we think are the industries of the future. And it's kind of a chicken and egg situation. I'm sure you may be like us. We've educated a lot of kids, and a lot go someplace else. We're right next door to Texas. A lot will go down to the Dallas job market. But we also know if we don't have a certain number of people with critical skills and background, that we won't bring in the industries,
right,
the higher tech of the future. So, again, this is a matter of economic development at home. We've got to have a labor force that will attract the kind of jobs we want for our kids.
Right. Well, speaking of education, I think another thing we're going to be really faced with across the nation is a teacher shortage. When we talk about training people for certain jobs, a lot of people who would potentially have been teachers in the past are going on to other professions and looking at other opportunities. And, a good teacher in a classroom I don't know how they do it. I taught Sunday school for 1 year, for an hour once a week. I died. So I don't know how. I have great admiration for teachers that can stick with the classroom for year to year to year and still provide the quality ed. But, a lot of our teachers are getting to be our age, and they're aging out. They're giving up their profession, and I'm not sure that young people are going into it with not with the dedication, but in the numbers that we're going to need.
Well, they just have more options, and
right,
and that's particularly true, obviously, for women. That's a good thing that those options are out there, but it means you're going to need to pay your teachers better, provide more flexibility. I'm going to switch the subject pretty dramatically here in the last part of the show. As you may be aware, we've had a great deal of problem in Oklahoma, a great deal of challenges with FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. We recently had a lot of wildfires that we felt like the response was a little slow. Of course, we've had tornadoes. We've had the Oklahoma City bombing, where FEMA did an absolutely superb job, I might say, back in '95. But there's a certain level of frustration in the state with the management of FEMA now that it's part of the Homeland Security apparatus. Do you have anything comparable to that in West Virginia, concerns in that regard?
Well, it's funny. Our experience with FEMA has been very good. Typically, when FEMA would come into West Virginia, it would be a flash flood because we have our mountains and our hollows, and they fill up pretty quickly when it rains very hard for a short period of time. FEMA's been really good responding to us in terms of temporary housing, in terms of setting up emergency centers. I haven't found any instances in our state where this has been a huge problem. Of course, with Katrina and Rita, I don't think that FEMA didn't turn up looking too good in that situation. So I think FEMA's trying to change, but when you become a part of a huge organization like Homeland Security, there are all kinds of organizational difficulties, I think. Hopefully we can get it right this time.
Yeah, that brings me to two things. Your comment, I think, about Katrina is spot on. Obviously it wasn't the best moment in terms of government performance, although I remember at the time, having dealt with FEMA during the Oklahoma City bombing and some instances in the late 90s when I was Secretary of State, I actually called some people that either were still in FEMA that I'd worked with that were very good, or people that had gone on but again were top-notch professionals, and asked them about the challenges with Katrina. And they all acknowledged that they'd fallen short. But as one of them put it to me, what most Americans don't understand is, he said, let's just take the World Trade Center and Katrina and compare them. This gentleman told me, he said, the World Trade Center was a 16-acre disaster site, displaced 50,000 Americans. We still had functioning police and fire support. We still had immediate access by road and water and rail to the point of the disaster. He said Katrina was 90,000 square miles, and over most of which there was no functioning police, no functioning fire, couldn't get to a lot of the most affected areas. So while we need to learn some things, the scope of this disaster, and this person put it very dramatically, says it's as close to a nuclear event without the casualties as we've ever had in the continental United States. And he said maybe we should be thinking at that level, but we just never have before. So really profound problems. You mentioned some of the organizational issues that were involved in this particular challenge with FEMA. Do you think it's been a good idea to have FEMA as part of Homeland Security, or would it make sense to have it, as it used to be, as a separate agency outside of Homeland Security?
Well, I kind of fall in the separate agency camp, I think. I would hope that, communications and interoperability would be available if FEMA were to go back to being a separate agency. I just think it is, but I do believe that FEMA's not big enough to be able to handle everything they're being asked to handle. I mean, we just had a hearing in my subcommittee about some meals that FEMA had purchased in anticipation of a hurricane season in 2005. Well, as we all know, it never developed. And FEMA ended up losing some of those meals to the tune of several $1 million. They were no longer useful, and there was heavy criticism on this. Well, now they've entered into a cooperative agreement with the Defense Logistics System, with DoD, that's going to help them manage their emergency supplies and emergency placement and all these kinds of things that you would have thought they were involved in. But I think that they really, to this point, had never really looked at the massiveness of what could happen as it did happen in Katrina.
It is. It's again a real challenge, and it's never an excuse for poor performance. But you can't plan everything where disaster is concerned. That's the point. It's a disaster, and so having everything in place, and dealing with it. People need help right now in a disaster, so it's not like you can go out and triple bid everything and take time, right, because you see the problems that we saw in Katrina, where people need help immediately, and if it takes money to get it, most people want to get it there as rapidly as possible. I particularly like your concept of getting it back out. I mean, one of the problems I found in dealing with FEMA, and again talking with people that are in it, in the old days, again, the function was primarily looking at natural disasters, and that was the mindset. And the reality is we're always going to have more hurricanes, more flash floods in West Virginia, more tornadoes in Oklahoma than we have terrorist attacks. But when you switch the agency and it becomes focused primarily, as most of Homeland Security appropriately is, on defending the United States from an attack, these other things become less important and really aren't brought into the planning process as early as possible. In your subcommittee, have you looked at any of the things that have to do with the ability of FEMA directors to actually make rapid decisions on the spot today when they've got a Homeland Security bureaucracy to work through versus the old days when pretty much nothing between them and the president.
No, we haven't actually looked at that, although I think that's an excellent thing that we ought to investigate or at least find out the answers to. I think it seems to me that in reviewing what happened with Katrina, even with they were unable to make decisions, couldn't coordinate with the state, couldn't coordinate with the local, just generally a big mess. But as you said, the scope of that disaster was huge. Hopefully we'll not have to face something like that again. But I got the feeling in the last hearing that FEMA's trying to improve, trying to make themselves logistically stronger, and then that will make them more efficient.
Well, that's great. Well, Congresswoman, we're just about out of time, but I want to thank you, obviously, for coming here today and joining us on our show. Appreciate very much your service to our country, your service to West Virginia. And I have to say, as I'm sure our viewers recognize, you've just been the nicest person to serve with on any committee I've ever been on, and I miss having that opportunity. But as we continue to address these and other important issues, I know you're going to continue to play a leading role in Congress, and thank you for taking time out. We just, as you know, had a good Oklahoma company come and start doing some business in your area, and that's another bond between us. So, again, thanks for all you do, Shelley. It's just great to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you.
You bet.